On the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, where the trees were draped in Spanish moss, stood Blackthorn Manor, a mansion that had long been abandoned. Its crumbling walls and shattered windows spoke of a forgotten past, one that no longer wanted to be remembered. The mansion was a relic of a time long gone, yet the locals knew it was no ordinary house. It had a dark history, one that was whispered about in hushed tones whenever the wind howled through the trees. The mansion seemed to breathe, its walls shifting and changing, as though it had a mind of its own. It was said that the rooms of the house would move, trapping those who dared enter. The mansion had claimed many lives over the years, its shifting halls leading those who ventured inside into madness. No one had dared enter after sunset, and anyone who had tried to explore it was never seen again. The mansion was a place of fear, a place where time and space twisted, and the living could never escape the clutches of the dead. The legend of Blackthorn Manor had spread far and wide, attracting the curious and the brave. Among them were 4 friends, Mia, Jacob, Emily, and Ryan. They had heard the stories and laughed them off as nothing more than superstition. It was a dare, a challenge, to see who could spend the most time inside the haunted mansion. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and an overabundance of courage, they made their way to the mansion on a chilly October evening. The wind picked up as they approached, causing the trees to sway and the leaves to rustle. The mansion loomed before them, dark and foreboding, its silhouette framed by the dying light of the setting sun. The gate creaked as they pushed it open, and a chill ran down their spines. It felt as though the house was watching them, waiting for them to enter. But they laughed it off, stepping forward into the yard. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the once beautiful garden was now overgrown with weeds. The mansion's windows were dark, but there was something unsettling about them, as if something, or someone, was watching from within. Inside, the house was even more unsettling. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was oppressive. The walls seemed to close in around them as they stepped into the grand foyer. The marble floors were cracked and covered in grime, and the once grand chandelier swayed gently above them, though there was no breeze. The smell of decay lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of something more sinister. The house was cold, far colder than it should have been for the time of year. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, but their curiosity pushed them forward. They decided to split up, each pair exploring a different part of the house. Mia and Jacob took the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. Emily and Ryan remained on the ground floor, their flashlights casting long shadows across the rooms. The house seemed to stretch endlessly before them, each room more bizarre than the last. But they were determined to uncover the truth, to prove that the stories were just that. Stories. Mia and Jacob wandered down a long, narrow hallway. The walls lined with portraits of people whose faces seemed to follow them as they moved. The eyes in the paintings were unsettling, filled with a mixture of sorrow and malice. The floor beneath, their feet creaked with every step, as though the house itself was groaning in protest. They reached a door at the end of the hall and pushed it open, revealing a dusty library. The shelves were filled with books, their pages yellowed with age. The books seemed out of place, as though they had been untouched for centuries. The room was dim, the only light coming from the flickering beam of their flashlights. Mia ran her hand along the spine of a book, feeling the weight of its history. But when she turned to speak to Jacob, he was gone. Panic surged through her as she called his name, but the only response was the echo of her own voice. She turned in circles, her heart racing. The hallway she had just walked down now seemed endless, stretching far beyond what she had remembered. The walls began to shift, closing in around her. She ran, but no matter which door she opened, she found herself back in the same room. Meanwhile, Emily and Ryan explored the dining room, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The room was large, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting scenes of feasts and revelry. But the most striking feature was the long, dark wood table that stretched across the room. It was set for a meal, complete with plates, goblets, and silverware. The food on the table looked fresh, steam rising from the dishes as though they had just been prepared. Emily frowned, feeling an unease settle in her stomach. She reached out to touch one of the goblets, and as her fingers brushed against the cold glass, the room went dark. The flickering light of their flashlights seemed to stutter, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. When the lights returned, everything had changed. The food had rotted, the plates cracked and covered in mold. The once perfect table was now a grotesque scene of decay, with maggots wriggling in the flesh of the meat. Emily recoiled, her stomach churning. Ryan, too, looked horrified, but before they could react, the room seemed to shift. The walls closed in, the space becoming smaller and smaller. The door they had entered through was no longer there. Mia stumbled through the hallways, her heart pounding in her chest. The house had changed again, the once familiar rooms now alien and terrifying. She felt as though the walls were alive, breathing in and out with each step she took. The floor beneath her feet groaned, and the air grew colder with every passing moment. She opened door after door, only to find herself in different rooms, each more twisted than the last. She entered a bedroom, its bed covered in a thick layer of dust. The room was empty, save for a figure standing by the window. Relief washed over her as she thought it might be Jacob. But when the figure turned, her blood ran cold. It wasn't Jacob. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. Her tattered dress fluttered in a wind that didn't exist. The woman's mouth opened, and a scream tore from her lips. The sound was deafening, echoing through the walls and shaking the very foundation of the house. Mia stumbled back, her heart racing. The woman's eyes locked onto hers, and Mia felt an icy hand grasp her wrist, pulling her closer. Ryan found himself in a narrow, winding staircase that seemed to descend into the bowels of the earth. He followed the steps, each one creaking under his weight. The air grew colder the deeper he went, and the silence was suffocating. At the bottom, he found a stone chamber, dimly lit by flickering candles that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the room was a large mirror, its surface rippling like water. As he stepped closer, he saw his reflection. But something was wrong. His reflection didn't mimic his movements. Instead, it smiled, a wide, twisted grin that sent a chill down his spine. Ryan froze, unable to look away as his reflection began to move independently of him. It reached out from the mirror, its hand stretching toward him. Panic surged through him as he tried to back away, but the mirror seemed to pull him in, its surface now like liquid glass. His reflection reached through the glass, grabbing him by the arm and dragging him toward the mirror. Ryan screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the glass, his body disappearing into the reflection. Emily stumbled through the dark, desperate to find a way out. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air thick with the scent of decay. She tried to retrace her steps, but the house had changed again. The hallway she had walked down now seemed endless, stretching far beyond what was possible. She entered a room, and to her horror, it was the library, where she had last seen Mia. But Mia was no longer alone. The woman in the tattered dress stood behind her, whispering in her ear. Mia's eyes were wide with terror, and her lips moved as if she were speaking, but no sound came out. Emily stepped forward, but the woman turned to face her. Her hollow eyes locked onto Emily's, and a cold, bone-chilling feeling washed over her. The woman's lips curled into a twisted smile, and Emily felt herself being pulled into the room. The door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside with the woman and Mia. The house seemed to pulse with life, its walls shifting and groaning as if it were alive. Mia, Emily, Ryan, and Jacob found themselves back in the foyer. But something was wrong. Their friends stood there, but they were different. Their eyes were black, their smiles wide and unnatural. Their voices overlapped, a chorus of whispers that sent a wave of dread through the group. "You can't leave," they said, their voices echoing in the room. The walls began to close in, and the once grand chandelier crashed to the floor with a deafening sound. The house groaned, its very structure shifting as if it were alive. The friends tried to run, but the doors were locked, the windows barred. The house was closing in on them, trapping them inside. Mia and Emily screamed as they were dragged into the darkness, their cries swallowed by the walls. Jacob and Ryan stood motionless, their eyes empty, their smiles never fading. The house fell silent once more. Blackthorn Manor stood in the moonlight, its walls still and cold. The mansion had claimed its latest victims, their souls trapped within its shifting halls. The townspeople whispered of the disappearances, but no one dared venture near the mansion. It waited, patient and hungry, for the next group of curious souls to wander too close. The rooms would shift again, the walls would close in, and the mansion would claim more lives. The curse of Blackthorn Manor would never end. The house was alive, and it would never let go.